Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopal Jaya Jaya Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopal Jaya Jaya Radha Hari Govinda Jaya Radha Hari Govinda Radha Hari Govinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Today, speaking from Bhagavad Gita, as it is, 4th chapter, 42nd verse, written somewhere?
Yes, sir.
Tasmat ajnana sambhutam pritstam jnana sinatmana chitvainam samshayam yogam atishto tishta bharata tasmat ajnana sambhutam pritstam jnana sinatmana chitvainam samshayam yogam atishto tishta bharata.
Jai Gurudev.
Tasmadajnana sambhutam Pritstam jnana sinatmanaha Chitvainam samshayam yogam Atishta tishta bharata Tasmadajnana sambhutam
Atishta Bharata.
Tasmadajnana sambhutam
Pritstam jnana sinatmanaha Chitvainam samshayam yogam Atishta bharata.
Please switch off cell phones. Thank you.
Vaishnavi.
Tasmadajnana sambhutam Pritstam jnana sinatmanaha Chitvainam samshayam yogam Atishta tishta bharata.
Tasmat.
Therefore,
Ajnana sambhutam, born of ignorance, pritstam, situated in the heart, jnana, of knowledge, asina, by the weapon, atmana, of the self, chitva, cutting off, enam, this, samshayam, doubt, yogam, in yoga, atishta, being situated, utishta, stand up to fight, bharata, O descendant of Bharata. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace of Prabhupada. Therefore, the doubts which have arisen in your heart out of ignorance should be slashed by the weapon of knowledge. Armed with yoga, O Bharata, stand and fight. Everyone please repeat. Therefore, the doubts which have risen in your heart out of ignorance should be slashed by the weapon of knowledge. Armed with yoga, O Bharata, stand and fight. The yoga system instructed in this chapter is called Sanatana Yoga, or eternal activities performed by the living entity. This yoga has two divisions of sacrificial actions. One is called sacrifice of one's material possessions, and the other is called knowledge of the self, which is pure spiritual activity. If sacrifice of one's material possessions is not dovetailed for spiritual realization, then such sacrifice becomes material. But one who performs such sacrifices with a spiritual objective or in devotional service makes a perfect sacrifice. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Vishesha Shunyavadi Astyatya Shetarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivashri Gaur Bhaktivinoda
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
So this is the last verse in this particular chapter, and as in many cases, Srila Prabhupada summarizes many of the points in the chapter in the last verse. Of course, I'm sure that all of you have been here through all these classes, so you know everything, but just in case, by chance, one or two of you may not have been here in the past 2 days, we can just review. Because this chapter is called Transcendental Knowledge. So, it's spoken, especially in these last few verses, especially starting from one of the most famous verses, which is a few verses back. One of the most famous verses, important verses of Bhagavad Gita, Sevaya. That one should accept knowledge from a self-realized soul. Most of us know that verse, but many of us don't concentrate on the next verse, which Krishna speaks, which is very, very important. So I thought I would just read that verse again, which is the introduction to this last part of the chapter. So I'll just read the translation of text 35. Text 34 we all know, Tatvidi Pranipati. And if you don't know that, then I would suggest you read it very carefully. One should, in a submissive attitude, surrender unto the spiritual master. Question, make relevant questions, and perform service. Of course, Srila Prabhupada, in a few occasions that I took note of, reversed the last 2 points out of the 3 points. Have a submissive attitude. That Srila Prabhupada always puts first. Because without a submissive attitude, we can't understand Krishna consciousness. But then, in a few places, Srila Prabhupada says, then sevaya. Then, by being instructed by the spiritual master, one performs devotional service, and then one can make proper inquiry. Prabhupada said, what is the use of encyclopedic questions? Simply asking the spiritual master about this or that or some other detail of the material world. Just as Krishna says in the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, what is the use of all this detailed knowledge when it is simply a spark of my transcendental splendor? What is the use of all this detailed knowledge? Otherwise, Krishna is anticipating what is the reality of the present world. There's so much detailed knowledge, string theory, the quantum field theory, otherwise trying to discover, analyze the world to the depth of such little particles that no one can even possibly experience them in any way other than through a mathematical formula. They have the God particle, which they thought they generated 6 months ago. So we found one, but unfortunately it escaped. It was in Switzerland. So it went right through Belgium and somewhere into England, and we lost it. there it is, God in particle form in English. But Krishna already anticipated this. Anoraniyan Mahato Mahiyan. Then Krishna says, of course, you want to find me as the smallest? Yes, I'm the smallest. I'm even smaller than that particle. What if you could ever define it, other than mathematically? No. And I'm the biggest also. So they want to find Krishna as the smallest, because as the smallest, they think they can somehow or another have dominion over the truth. Otherwise, the truth is some little particle that you can manipulate and you can control, which they've never been able to do anyway. But if you were able to control it, it's much easier than to control the whole universe and what's beyond the universe. So the point is that Krishna says, what's the use of such detailed analysis of this world when we have nothing to do with this world? And this is the whole point of the verse we just read, which is the conclusion of previous verses, which we'll just go through very quickly. So, after Krishna says, you must receive knowledge from a self-realized soul, and Srila Prabhupada, and a very long purport, both text 34 and 35, here's what Krishna says afterwards. Having obtained real knowledge from a self-realized soul, you will never fall again into such illusion. Now this is a very important statement by Krishna, because many of us here in this room have received spiritual initiation, and yet sometimes we fall into illusion. So what does that mean? That means you have not obtained real knowledge. Otherwise, how can you? Krishna says right here, if you have really attained this self-realized knowledge, this knowledge from a self-realized soul, you will never fall again into illusion. So it means that most of us take spiritual initiation mechanically and not in the heart. And this has to do with our verse right now. We're considering that it's time. We have to situate, there is ignorance situated deeply within the heart. Chaitanya Marjanam Bhava Mahadvagni Nivapanam. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Bhava Mahadvagni Nivapanam. This extinguishes the forest fire of material existence. First, the holy name takes away the dust. Otherwise, the gross ignorance is covering us. And then, once you get rid of gross ignorance, sometimes we come to Krishna consciousness and we feel very happy, very nice, that it's a very wonderful process. But then the forest fire of material existence, otherwise the karmic reaction of all those lifetimes is still deeply situated within the heart. And it comes up again and again. And therefore the present verse, Asina Atmana, with the weapon, the transcendental weapon, the weapon of transcendental knowledge, you can cut this. But there are other factors which Krishna mentions between the verse I'm just reading now and the present verse we're considering. There are other factors that are taken into account, and one of the most important ones is faith. And we'll just get into that. This is just a little review. So, we have to, when we try to hear Bhagavad Gita, we have to try to understand every word that Krishna is saying. Otherwise, Bhagavad Gita is a summary. Srila Prabhupada said many times, it is the summary, the conclusion of all the Upanishads. Therefore, it is called Gita Upanishad, because it summarizes the conclusion of the Upanishads. And what is the conclusion of the Upanishads? Vedanta. And what is the conclusion of Vedanta? Srimad Bhagavatam. So essentially, Bhagavad Gita is the knowledge by which we can understand Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the actual abhideya, or the practice of devotional service. This is the sambandha, establishing a relationship. Therefore, every word is sutra. Every word is very carefully placed by Krishna. Only Krishna can do this. Krishna can converse in 45 minutes and convey 700 sutras, or 700 very condensed understandings. So we have to take into account every Yat yatva napunarmamam. You will never come back to illusion. And for this knowledge, you will see that all living beings are but part of the Supreme, or in other words, that they are mine. So, transcendental knowledge, Srila Prabhupada, in part of the purport that we just read, he says that this sacrifice, let's go back to what we just read, this sacrifice there are two types of sacrifice covered here in this chapter, fourth chapter. One, sacrifice of material possessions, and the other sacrifice is the ignorance which distinguishes ourselves from the body. So, if you sacrifice so many material things, if you sacrifice many material things, but you don't come to the spiritual understanding of the self, then your sacrifice, as Rupa Goswami says, such sacrifice or such level of austerity simply dries the heart. Otherwise, it is simply dries up our heart of spiritual emotion. And therefore, there is no real understanding. So, but here, in the verse that leads into what we're considering now, Krishna says that understanding the self means understanding that every one of the living entities is part and parcel of Krishna. They are all within Krishna. They are all very dear to Krishna. Otherwise, if you understand Krishna from a self-realized person, you have to understand that every living entity in this material world, which of course we will go into in chapter 5 in more detail, every living entity is pure, and they're all being manipulated by the three modes of material nature. And therefore everything that's happening in this world is happening through the agency of the three modes of material nature. And the three modes of material nature, as Krishna says in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Maya Dakshena Prakati Prakati, Maya Dakshena, what's it? Maya Dakshena. That material energy is under Krishna's direction. So we can't say that because Krishna is asking us to be free of illusion, therefore we can't say that it's Krishna's arrangement that we be in illusion. It is our desire that we be in illusion, and Krishna creates the facility for us to be in that illusion. Otherwise, this is also explained in the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, in verses 12, 13, and 14, and 15. Verses 12, 13, and 14, Krishna says that just as I am the light of the sun, the light of the moon, and the light and the heat of fire, just as I am these things which facilitate the material activities of the living entity, also I am Tashmitir Gyanam Apohanam Cha. I am remembrance of the material world, or remembrance of the spiritual, our spiritual reality. Whichever one. Whichever one you want, I will facilitate. You choose. So this is our choice, to be in illusion. So we have to understand the Supreme. Then Krishna goes on to say that this transcendental knowledge, so he's speaking about transcendental knowledge. This transcendental knowledge will burn up all of our sinful activities. But then, Krishna says, but ignorant and faithless persons who doubt the revealed scriptures. So there, Srila Prabhupada explains in that purport, there are three types of people who don't become Krishna conscious. Ignorant people, people who are very foolish and ignorant, they don't become Krishna conscious. Faithless persons are dealt with further in the 9th chapter, 3rd verse of the 9th chapter. They cannot develop Krishna consciousness, they stay within the cycle of birth and death in the material world. And then there are doubtful persons, who Srila Prabhupada says are the worst of all. Because ignorant people can live in a fool's paradise. Otherwise, even in the Christian Bible, Christ says, you should be hot or cold, but don't be lukewarm. So the doubtful are like that. They don't enjoy materially or spiritually. Because they don't have full faith in the Scripture, because they're always doubting, what about this, what about that? No. And these faithless persons, they're very convinced about their scientific or philosophical conclusions. And ignorant people are very convinced about enjoying their senses. But doubtful people, they can't enjoy their senses or they can't enjoy transcendental knowledge. So they're the worst of all. So ignorant and faithless persons who doubt revealed Scriptures do not attain God consciousness. They fall down. For the doubting soul, there is happiness neither in this world nor in the next. So the same thing, basically, as the Bible says, Krishna says here. There is no happiness in this world because they're doubting. They know that there's transcendental knowledge. They have a little bit of faith in it, but they don't have sufficient faith in Krishna's words to accept what Krishna is saying. So faith is a very important thing which Krishna brought into play. That transcendental knowledge has to be coupled with faith. Then it is complete. Faith is a very important thing, as Rupa Goswami says, Ado Shraddha and Nishta. He mentions in the progression of Krishna consciousness, in the beginning there must be faith. Srila Prabhupada says in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, in the introduction, that at least one has to have theoretical faith that Krishna is God. Otherwise you'll never understand Bhagavad Gita as it is. You'll understand it according to such and such and such and such and such and such. Now, all those Bhagavad Gitas that Srila Prabhupada said existed before his. What is the use of another one? Because all of those miss the point. Just a slight problem that they miss the whole point that Krishna is trying to convey. That he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that we have to serve him. So, then Krishna says in the previous verse to the one we're reading, one who acts in devotional service, renouncing the fruits of his actions, and whose doubts have been destroyed by transcendental knowledge, is situated factually in the self. Therefore he is not bound by the reactions of work, O conqueror of riches. So one may come to the conclusion as we come to today's verse which we just read, so that all these doubts have to be cut out by transcendental knowledge, coupled with faith. Faith has to be there. Faith in Krishna. Now this will become apparent as we read the purport. So the first part of the purport, Srila Prabhupada says there has to be renunciation of material possession. Right there, many people will say, wait a minute, I can't, this is not for me. I don't want to renounce my material possession. I like my material possession. But renunciation in this case, especially because Bhagavad Gita is being spoken to Arjuna, who is being prodded into a war where Yudhishthira will attain a whole empire. So he's giving to Yudhishthira and to the Pandavas a whole empire, the whole world to rule. And yet he's speaking about renunciation. This is why Arjuna is a little confused. You want me to fight to gain a kingdom, and you're telling me to give up everything. This is a little confusing. These doubts will come up in the next few verses, which we'll be considering in the next few days. So, Krishna is saying renunciation has to be spiritual renunciation, meaning that I understand that these things don't belong to me, and that their purpose, all of my possessions, starting with the material body and everything else that I may possess, their purpose is to serve Krishna and to please Krishna. That is renunciation. If the renunciation is just I give up some objects, then we become dry speculators, and tapasvis. And there are so many of those. You can go to India, you can go to Kumbh Mela, and you'll see so many tapasvis sticking little pitchforks through their arms and doing all kinds of things, mutilating their bodies, and you see some Nag Babas fighting with one another with swords, because they get angry. And so is this what Krishna is wanting in Bhagavad Gita? No. Srila Prabhupada said that it's simply like a mystical gymnastics. The brother mentioned in one class that the whole spiritual array of things in present day India is like a mystical gymnastics. And Krishna is not impressed by such gymnastics. Otherwise, Krishna is not coming to this world to see a circus. Krishna is not within our heart to see, what can these living entities do? Let me see how far out they can go. This is not Krishna's desire. Krishna's desire is to purify us with transcendental knowledge and give us that faith. So you give up these activities in knowledge of the self. You give up these possessions. Otherwise, the sense of possessiveness with knowledge of the self, that I am spirit soul. These things don't belong to me. They're here to serve Krishna. This world is here to serve Krishna. Let me understand the art of yoga, which was already spoken about in the second chapter. And let me apply it to my life. Whether I'm a Grihastha, Brahmachari, Sannyasi, Vanaprastha, Brahmana, Kshatriya. This Bhagavad Gita applies to every one of these categories. It's not just for Brahmana. It's not just for Kshatriyas because Arjuna was a Kshatriya. It's for everyone. It's not like we can think that, well, I chant Hare Krishna, so therefore I don't really have to worry about Bhagavad Gita. Because if we chant without proper faith and without proper knowledge, our chanting, as we recite every day before we recite the 10 offenses, we can chant for hundreds of years or hundreds of lifetimes, and we won't achieve prema dana. We won't achieve Krishna prema dana, the wealth of Krishna's loving devotional service. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada continues with the next point, very important point. So now he's made a distinction between two things: renunciation of material objects and renunciation of the bodily conception of life. Now he goes on. When we come to spiritual activities, we find that these are also divided into two. Namely, understanding of one's own self, or one's constitutional position. This was the last one in the last comparison. Now it's the first one. And the truth regarding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One who follows the path of Bhagavad Gita as it is can very easily understand these two important divisions of spiritual knowledge. Now, Srila Prabhupada says in the beginning, and also it is stated by Krishna in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, and stated by Krishna in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Now, who besides Damodar Maharaj knows what is the third element? Otherwise, knowledge of the self, knowledge of the Supreme Person. What is the third element that's spoken about as the ingredients of knowledge? Three things. See someone else anyone else besides Damodar Maharaj and Gopta? There's another very important factor, which is also spoken about in the Ishupanishad. There's vidya and avidya. I'll give you a little hint. What is avidya? Ignorance. So where does ignorance take place? It doesn't take place in Vaikuntha. Where does it take place? In the material world. So knowledge of the self, knowledge of the Lord, and knowledge of this material energy, material world. Because if you have knowledge of the self and knowledge of the Lord, but you don't know how to apply it properly in this world, in the different circumstances. Otherwise, Arjuna thought he had perfect knowledge, and he gave his arguments in the beginning. He thought, well, I studied scriptures, I'm knowledgeable. But he applied it improperly. He was under the bodily concept of life, which Krishna is speaking about here. Ajnana sambutan, Pritsthana, this ignorance which is situated in the heart, meaning the bodily concept of life, identifying with family, friends, society, love, friendship within this material world. these things have to be slashed away. It doesn't mean we give up our family, we give up our friends, we give up the world, but it means we understand what is real friendship, what is real love, what is real family. We understand that we have a transcendental family of every living entity under the umbrella of Krishna consciousness. But at the same time, we don't embrace the tiger. No. Otherwise, understanding that everyone is part and parcel of Krishna doesn't mean that we associate with everyone, because some people are in ignorance. So we try to give them Krishna consciousness. That's the point that is being made here. So these two things, Srila Prabhupada is only speaking about these two things because only these two things are being emphasized in this chapter. For him, that person who understands these two things, the soul and the supersoul, there is no difficulty in obtaining perfect knowledge of the self as part and parcel of the Lord. And such understanding is beneficial, for such a person can easily understand the transcendental activities of the Lord. Now here, one may say, well, where is it? No, this whole chapter is a little confusing, talks about all kinds of sacrifices. Where is this transcendental knowledge? So here Srila Prabhupada reminds us, where did we find this transcendental knowledge? In the beginning of this chapter, the transcendental activities of the Lord were discussed by the Supreme Lord Himself. So we're talking about verses 4:5 through 4:9. Krishna discusses, after he introduces this chapter by saying that I gave this knowledge to the sun god so many years ago, and Arjuna says, well, how could you have done that if you're here now? It's a typical question. People always ask me, who created Krishna? So this is a very common question, believe it or not. So then Krishna explains that although I appear to be born within this world and I take different types of my transcendental body appears to change, I always maintain my transcendental nature. And I'm always the Ishwar, I'm always the controller of the living entities. When I was 3 months old, when I was even less, I kicked a cart, Shakatasvara. When I was 3 months old, I killed Putana. Later, I killed Trinavarta. When I was just a little baby, I couldn't even walk. And I killed 3 tremendously huge demons. So I never lose my position as a Supreme Personality of God. Don't think that I do. So Krishna's explaining his transcendental position, and then he sums it up. That if you can understand the transcendental nature of these transformations that can be seen as my birth and my transcendental activities, then you will never take birth again in this world. So, this was given by Krishna himself. He explains himself as the transcendental Supreme Personality of Godhead. One who does not understand the instructions of the Gita is faithless and is to be considered to be misusing the fragmental independence awarded to him by the Lord. Very important statement by Srila Prabhupada. Otherwise, the independence, the free will that we have been given it has a specific purpose. It is not, if it's not used for that purpose, which is understanding Krishna and serving Krishna. Otherwise, free will means that I choose to serve Krishna. And I choose to serve Krishna under the guidance of the self-realized soul. And I choose to understand and take those instructions very carefully in devotional service and inquire how to perfect that service, how to serve Krishna in the most first-class way. This is the proper use of independence, proper use of free will. Otherwise, practically speaking, every decision we're making, Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada here is saying, practically speaking, every decision we take to try to enjoy this material world is a misuse of independence. Otherwise, there'll be a reaction. That's a nice way of saying there will be a reaction. If I say that you're misusing something, just like if I say, I gave you some money and you're misusing it, it means that soon you won't have any money. And then you'll be in a very unfortunate situation. This is what almost all parents tell their children, and they generally don't listen. In spite of such instructions, one who does not understand the real nature of the Lord as eternal, blissful, all-knowing personality of Godhead is certainly fool number one. This is another very important one. This purport is so amazing. I haven't read it for a while. I didn't have a chance to read it before I came to this class. But this statement again, one who does not understand, in spite of such instructions, otherwise we're here hearing Bhagavad Gita, and many of us will go out and right after this, maybe watch a movie or do this, or talk about Maya, so many material activities, whatever. Otherwise, we won't be here tomorrow for Mangalarti, many of us. And so, the point is that this ignoring Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead and understanding Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead means being engaged in devotional service 24 hours a day, Kirtaniya Sada Hari, as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has instructed us. Ignorance can be removed by gradual acceptance of the principles of Krishna consciousness. Now this is something that was said, I can remember one of the previous verses. Anyway, I don't have time to find it. But,
That verse that says step by step, gradually, step by step.
We're saying gradual. Which verse is that?
The chapter.
No, one of the previous verses right here.
Chapter 4.
In this chapter 4. There's a word, but I can't remember what it is. Hopefully our transcendental Bhagavad Gita memory comes out in our... Anyway, there's a word here in one of these last verses where Krishna says, very gradually we understand this. Meaning, just like there's a famous verse in the Bhagavatam that Nashta Prayeshva Bhadvareshu Nityam Bhagavata Se. Nashta Prayeshva. That almost. Otherwise, why doesn't this devotional service totally, why does it almost? And it's explained that the word almost is used because it's a gradual process. Otherwise, you take up devotional service, you get some benefit, you get some advancement, but you have to keep applying it daily, hourly, every moment, chanting every day, just like we were discussing a little earlier today. If you get up in the morning and you attend Mangalarti, or if you don't live near the temple, if you have your own Mangalarti and you hear the Bhagavatam and you chant the holy name, then everything you do in that day will be you'll be able to do it with transcendental consciousness. But if you don't do that, you'll be overcome by the modes of passion and ignorance. And then the whole day becomes a frustration. And then the nighttime, you look for the relief by going into the mode of ignorance. Watch the television, sit around, waste time. Because you can't avoid it. If you spend the whole day in the mode of passion, you will have to take refuge in the mode of ignorance. There's no question. You must do it. Just like we see many people, they work very hard because they have to maintain their family. And afterwards they have no energy to come home and read Bhagavad Gita. Because they're too much in the mode of passion. Trying to do too much in this material world. And therefore, they come home and they don't want to read Bhagavad Gita, they want to see a movie. They just want to sit back and forget about everything. And that's what's happening to almost everyone in the material world. Because we're becoming overwhelmed by the way that the material energy is being thrust upon us. And thus Srila Prabhupada said that Vaishnavas should be very careful to cultivate the mode of goodness in the morning and in the evening, so that in the midst of those times, whatever circumstance, Krishna speaks about this in the beginning of the second chapter, Vishame Samupastitam, in this hour of crisis. The hour of crisis means when we're not in the kirtan, when we're not hearing Bhagavad Gita, when we're not hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, when we're not chanting the holy name directly. Those circumstances in life, this is the hour of crisis. This is the moment of crisis that we have to confront with Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is awakened by different types of sacrifices. This is the conclusion now. Krishna consciousness is awakened by different types of sacrifices to the demigods, sacrifices to Brahman, sacrifices in celibacy, in household life, in controlling the senses, in practicing mystic yoga, in penance, in foregoing mutual material possessions, in studying the Vedas, and in partaking of all of the social institution called Varnashram Dharma. So this is what was discussed in detail in this chapter. All of these are known as sacrifice, and all of them are based on regulated action. But within all these activities, the important factor is self-realization. Otherwise, if you do all these things, which are recommended in this chapter, just like the 6th chapter, there's all kinds of yogic recommendations. But the real purpose is, at the end, when Arjuna rejects all these things as impossible, and Krishna says, yeah, that's right, you have to practice bhakti yoga. You can't do it this way. You and most people in this world. Srila Prabhupada said in regard to this, there may be some people somewhere in the Himalayas who can do this. But most of us cannot do it. And so, one who seeks that objective is the real student of Bhagavad Gita. But one who doubts the authority of Krishna falls back. One is therefore advised to study Bhagavad Gita or any other scripture under a bona fide spiritual master with service and surrender. So again, now Krishna is summarizing this last part. At the end of the 8th chapter, Krishna says, Vedishu Jagashu Tapasu Chayava Dhanishu Yat Punya Palam Varishtam. That all of these things which are recommended, Vedic studies, sacrifices, austerities, penances, charity, and ritualistic activities, Adyati Yat Sarvanidam Viditva. One can surpass them all with this one activity, that Yogi Param Sthanam Upaiti Chadyam, that one becomes a fixed up yogi in bhakti yoga. And one can surpass all these things. Otherwise, all these different recommended processes of sacrifice, which we just read about, which we just summarized, which are given in this chapter, if one takes shelter of a self-realized soul and cultivates transcendental spiritual knowledge, one can. So this is how Srila Prabhupada will summarize the last part of the chapter. A bona fide spiritual master is in the disciplic succession from time eternal. And he does not deviate at all from the instructions of the Supreme Lord as they were imparted millions of years ago to the Sun God, from whom the instructions of Bhagavad Gita have come down to the earthly kingdom. So here Srila Prabhupada is tying in the end of the chapter with the beginning of the chapter. Why did Krishna speak about revealing Bhagavad Gita to the Sun God? Because it's coming down. There was never a break. There was never a pause. And if there ever is a pause, Krishna immediately reestablishes it, just as he's doing with Arjuna. But that same knowledge, Srila Prabhupada is confirming here, has been preserved by the disciplic succession. It was never lost. It was never really lost. But it was lost to the majority of people in this world. Just like Chaitanya Vaishnavism apparently was lost just before the times of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, because all of the eternal associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went back home, back to Godhead with him. And there was only a few, and after Narottam Das Thakur, who was the last big acharya, and most of his predecessors weren't big acharyas in the sense of having many followers. They were, Rupa Goswami, six Goswamis, Vrindavan. They didn't have many disciples. They were absorbed in explaining the Chaitanya philosophy. And Narottam Das Thakur, he had many, with everybody after him, they were practically all Babajis. So there was a disciplic succession, but it was unknown to the world. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur again brought it, just as Krishna is again bringing the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita through Arjuna to the world. One should therefore follow the path of Bhagavad Gita as it is expressed in the Gita itself, and beware of self-interested people after personal aggrandizement who deviate others from the actual path. The Lord is definitely the Supreme Person, and his activities are transcendental. One who understands this is a liberated person from the very, very beginning of his study of Bhagavad Gita. Thus ends the Bhaktivinoda purports of the 4th chapter of Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of transcendental knowledge. So in conclusion, this last part is very important. Beware. Otherwise, Krishna is telling us, take shelter of a self-realized soul. But make sure it is a self-realized soul. Make sure that Samit Panir, Shotriyam Brahmanishtam. Make sure that this person has heard. The self-realized soul means someone who has heard properly from the spiritual master. And not someone who slept through the class. But someone who heard properly. And Brahmanishtam. And how do you know that they heard properly? Because they apply it in their lives on a daily basis. That's how we know. Otherwise, when we see someone constantly fixed up in devotional service, therefore, when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explained to Sanatana Goswami the process of accepting a guru and the process of the guru accepting a disciple, he said that this should be done over a period of time. And Srila Prabhupada summarizes it in 1 year minimum. 1 year minimum one should take to understand that this person is self-realized. Meaning that even though the person may be a devotee, is their level of self-realization compatible to my needs? This is a very important factor. Otherwise, someone may be self-realized, but if we can't, if we're not, because of some characteristics, some personality traits, something, we're not accepting what they're saying and applying it in our lives, then we have to make sure that we accept that person who can bring the transcendental knowledge, this sword which is spoken about in this, and effectively cut, just like you may go to an expert surgeon. But if the surgeon makes the wrong cut, Damodar Maharaj can explain this. He's going to the best surgeon, but he still has a patch on his eye. So, no. If we go to the wrong surgeon, he may have all kinds of degrees, but if you see everyone, has died who goes to his clinic, or hasn't been cured, and they may have all the degrees in the world, but you have to make sure that they have this ability to cut out that ignorance from my heart. Because Krishna consciousness is not just a process of giving some dry knowledge. It is a process of touching the heart. Because ultimately, I was just reading a letter that I had to review a letter someone wrote me that had written me 2 years ago. And they were asking about transcendental knowledge and emotions. And I was explaining to them that on the transcendental platform, there is only emotion. Once you were actually in Vaikuntha, and what to speak of if you were in Goloka Vrindavan, there is only emotion. there's no need for knowledge. As Srila Prabhupada said, we don't see the gopis sitting down studying Vedanta Sutra. Otherwise, once you go through the process of transcendental knowledge and you attain Krishna, and you're actually living with Krishna in the transcendental world, then everything is spiritual emotion. But we can't imitate those spiritual emotions as long as we are conditioned. So, therefore, the self-realized soul has to be able to impart transcendental knowledge and at the same time awaken our spiritual emotions by chanting, by kirtan, by all of the things that Srila Prabhupada introduced in our Krishna consciousness movement. Not a question of I just get Bhagavad Gita and I go home and I study it. No, there has to be association of Vaishnavas. There has to be chanting of the holy name. There has to be proper hearing. There has to be proper worship of the deity. All these things have to be there to awaken this transcendence. Otherwise, Srila Prabhupada wouldn't have given us this process. If it was just a question of buy a Bhagavad Gita, go and read it, and then you'll be self-realized, then why do we have temples? Why do we struggle to maintain these temples and keep them going and worship the deity and have kirtan and provide prasadam for hundreds of people? Because all of these things are necessary to awaken the transcendental emotions within our heart and displace and purify those material emotions which are just reflections of the real emotions that are there in the soul. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem Satyakali. That Krishna consciousness, pure Krishna consciousness exists within the heart. It's not created. It exists within the heart. It has to be awakened. So this transcendental process given, imparted by the self-realized soul is awakening our original transcendental position. And this is something that requires some faith coupled with transcendental knowledge, coupled with the process of Krishna consciousness given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is blissful, Kevala Ananda Kanda. As Lochan Das Thakur says, this is Kevala Ananda, this is pure bliss. This is nothing but bliss. And if we're not experiencing nothing but bliss, it means we're not doing it properly. If I can feel anything other than transcendental bliss, then it means I have to keep working on it. It's still a gradual process. It's not that the transcendental bliss will come and I just enjoy my senses until I'm 50, and when I'm 50, I can take sannyas and the transcendental bliss will just, come in by a magic water process. It has to be awakened daily, every day, day by day, by a conscientious application of Krishna consciousness in our lives. This is very, very important. We have to practice every day. Kirtaniya Sadahari, 24 hours a day. So I'll stop here. Are there any comments? Any questions? If there's none, I just have to emphasize, there's one here.
Gurudev, like after taking initiation, there's always, for me, the mentality of I'm situated properly, came into the heart, and I would think I'm not in the mood of ignorance because I've accepted a spiritual master. I'm chanting, I'm in temple, sad, so therefore I am not in ignorance. But yet a taste for the holy name don't come, a taste for hearing doesn't come. Is there something that we can look at to see if, like, how much in ignorance we are in? Is there like some mechanism, is there some formula to detect when that ignorance is coming so we can escape?
That is the process. The process is that we constantly apply, we constantly inquire. The process is we inquire. We just talk about that. That Pariprasnena Sevaya. we inquire, how can I serve Krishna better? That is the indicator of our seriousness in Krishna consciousness, of our desire to overcome the ignorance which is deeply rooted in the heart. Taking initiation. Initiation is a step. It means I'm beginning, therefore the word initiation. I'm beginning the process of transcendental ascendance to the realm of Krishna consciousness. I'm beginning. So the beginning is not the end. This is the biggest mistake that most people make. Now I've been initiated, I'm okay. That's not Vaishnava philosophy. Vaishnava philosophy. Now, what are the indicators of ignorance? What are the indicators of transcendental knowledge? Avyakta kalatam, that I don't waste any time. So Rupa Goswami has given us indicators. How can we avoid ignorance? How can we avoid it? Don't waste time. Mana shunyata, be free from false ego. Virakti, cultivate detachment through transcendental knowledge. Ashabandha sumukanta, always be with full faith and loving devotion. Have the assurance that by serving Krishna, no matter how long it takes, by serving Krishna every day with faith and devotion, I will progress. I have that faith and that understanding. Namagana sada ruchi, that always trying to taste more and more of the holy name. So how do we apply that? When I'm chanting japa, I hear every name carefully. I bring my mind back, as Krishna says it at the end of the 6th chapter. I bring my mind back again and again. Every time it goes away, even for one name, this is what it means. Nama, I want to have that taste. I really want to taste the holy name. So therefore, just like if you're eating and you're holding your nose, you won't taste it. So if we're chanting the holy name and we're doing things that are not conducive to Krishna consciousness, it's just like eating and holding the nose. You won't taste it. Because you're doing something that eliminates the possibility of tasting. Anyone want to try it? Try it. Eating and holding your nose. You won't taste anything. And all these, these are the indicators of Bhava Bhakti. Otherwise, coming to the platform of being free from ignorance, being situated. So Rupa Goswami gives these things. It's there in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's there in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. These things have been given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and outlined by Rupa Goswami. If we carefully apply them to our lives, and we have to be determined more than anything. Determined every day, I want to be Krishna conscious. I will do what it takes to be Krishna conscious. Just like anything in life. If you want to make money, it's not like I want to be a millionaire, so I'll just wait till I have $1 million. It's not enough to want it. Yeah, I want to be a millionaire, but I don't want to go through the process of obtaining $1 million. That's not very logical. So I want to be Krishna conscious, but I don't want to practice Krishna consciousness. Krishna must understand my dilemma, and therefore he should just, give me Krishna consciousness when, as soon as I finish enjoying my senses. I want to get rid of all these material desires except this one. Krishna, please take everything away from me. Take all these desires except for this one, this one, this one. Just let me enjoy these for a few years more. And then you can just give me transcendental knowledge, pure Krishna consciousness, and we have a good deal. Thank you very much. We made a good deal here. So this is not the process. Is that okay?
Very good. Can I put on a CD with the japa or somebody chanting or chant along whole day and think that that is enough in chanting japa? So I chant. But can I avoid doing japa on beads and just put it on and chant?
Avoid chanting japa on beads?
Yeah.
Of course not. Srila Prabhupada says many times in Chaitanya Charitamrita, the japa must be chanted on beads. That's a problem.
But I'm chanting whole day other than beads.
Everyone may be chanting, but this is the instruction of the spiritual master. This was the example of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There's one part in Chaitanya Charitamrita where it says that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was chanting, he was chanting on a string. And Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, therefore, this indicates that the Supreme Lord is telling us that we must chant on beads. So, some people may use an apparatus, a clicker, or some. There has to be some apparatus. It should better to be Tulsi beads, but there has to be some means of chanting. Otherwise, as long as we have the cheating propensity, how can we be assured that I will chant minimum 16 rounds? And 16 rounds is minimum. Otherwise, saying minimum means that we should probably chant more. We should come to the point of chanting 64 rounds. And the only reason not to chant 64 rounds is that I have so much service to do that I don't have time to chant 64 rounds. Otherwise, better to chant 64 rounds. Just like I told the devotees many times. When first time I went to Calcutta, I stayed with one life member right beside the Bagh Bazaar temple of Gaudiya Math. And I went in the morning, saw one old elderly Vaishnava every day. First day I went like 4:15. Second day I went at 3 o'clock, and here he was. So I asked him, he said, I am godbrother of your guru. I offer my obeisance. I said, so you come every day? He said, yes, I come at 1:30, chant my 64 rounds, then I go to work. So this is seriousness in Krishna consciousness. And he comes every morning, chants, goes to Mangalarati, chants some more, and then goes to work. So, there's no shortcut in Krishna consciousness. The shortcut is already given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We can't shortcut Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu is already giving us the shortcut. But we can't further shortcut. Let me cut it down to 4 rounds. Let me cut it down to 1 round. Why should I chant any rounds? I'm Krishna conscious. I have Krishna in my heart. Now, I've heard these arguments. It's not what Srila Prabhupada prescribed. To be sure in Krishna consciousness means you follow the Acharya. Maybe somebody can just chant. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said to Haridas Thakur that you've already chanted enough rounds for many lifetimes. You don't have to continue. You just take prasad. You've already chanted for many lifetimes. But we want to start out that way. Let me just take prasad and not chant. We want the opposite program of Mahaprabhu. Yeah.
Haridas Thakur was very old.
Yeah, he was very old. And the reason he said I can't finish my rounds was not because he was old. It was because he knew that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his mind was disturbed that Mahaprabhu will leave and what will I do? How will I exist without Mahaprabhu? But then Mahaprabhu said, I have the same problem. If you leave, how will I exist without you? So we have a catch-22 here. Who's going to leave first? But of course Mahaprabhu gave him his mercy. Yes.
My experience of reading Srila Prabhupada's books is that he somehow has that ability to cater to persons on many different levels of spiritual advancement. Even within a simple book like Bhagavad Gita, like it has like what I call gems hidden within that touches some gems like hidden within that touches like some very intimate levels of devotional service. And to reconcile that point you made, that one has to take shelter of a spiritual master who can take care of his spiritual needs there are many people who often say that they have a particular need in Krishna consciousness that isn't being met in some way or the other, and they feel the need to take shelter of other Vaishnavas who, in some cases, may not be directly within Iskcon. And they say that we need to do that because there are some things that Srila Prabhupada did not do, there's something that Srila Prabhupada did not give, and we need this. So I feel that this person is taking care of that need of mine in a way I can relate more. How do you reconcile that as followers trying to be faithful to Srila Prabhupada?
There may be, Srila Prabhupada himself recommends many things in his own books, that if you want to know more about this, you can read Krishna Karnamrita, you can read Brihad Bhagavatamrita. Those weren't Srila Prabhupada's books. But the point is, if someone refers to any of those literatures or other Vaishnavas, it has to be within the realm. Otherwise, if it has to be within the realm of the instructions of one's own spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada said something very interesting one time about Shiksha. He said, if a Shiksha Guru does not agree with the Diksha Guru, then that is demoniac. So otherwise, one time someone asked me, who was initiated by someone who was not at Iskcon, if I could be their Shiksha Guru. And I said, I may not be able to do that because if I disagree with some details that your spiritual master has given, then I will be guilty of somehow or another creating some doubt in your mind. So, before one takes shiksha, whether it be within Iskcon, one has to have permission from the spiritual master. That's the point. And if the spiritual master sees a difficulty in taking that shiksha, because even though that person may be modified, and may be speaking modified Vaishnava philosophy, it may not be applicable to the process that Srila Prabhupada has recommended for us. So then, how do you reconcile it? One has to make a decision. I'm going to follow my spiritual master, I'm going to follow someone else. That's how you reconcile it. The process is to follow one's spiritual master. And to not think that there's something missing. There's nothing missing in what Srila Prabhupada gave us. There are unlimited details in Krishna consciousness. There are unlimited pastimes of Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada didn't speak every one of those pastimes. Srila Prabhupada didn't enumerate every detail that was given by Rupa Goswami. But he summarized everything very perfectly. And if there's a need to go into different details, therefore, there are many devotees in Iskcon who have translated different Vaishnava scriptures. So that if someone needs those details, they can go into those details and still maintain oneself in the spirit of Krishna consciousness that Srila Prabhupada created within Iskcon. Iskcon has a very specific mission. And to accomplish that mission, we have to execute the mission according to Srila Prabhupada's mood. Srila Prabhupada had a particular mood that other Vaishnavas may not have. So, just because someone may have different transcendental knowledge, if one is not able to take that transcendental knowledge and maintain the mood of Srila Prabhupada, then if one is able to do that, then why would one spiritual master negate taking those instructions? And if one spiritual master does, it means that he thinks that that person is not ready, or hearing from that particular individual will not be conducive to maintaining the mood of Srila Prabhupada. That's how we can reconcile it. And ultimately, every individual has to decide. Yes?
Shantavibhara, you were saying, when you were phrasing the question to Mara, you said, But he said they have needs that are not being met. So I was wondering, what are those needs? Is it material needs or is it spiritual? Material needs, the spiritual master is not here to satisfy our material needs. Although to some degree he does that, but it's spiritual.
Yeah, speaking about the spiritual, trying to put it in a euphemistic way, not to be
Yeah, otherwise saying that Srila Prabhupada is not satisfying all my spiritual needs. So if someone thinks like that, then they're a fool. Now someone may want to delve more deeply into Krishna consciousness. They have to do that under the guidance of the spiritual master. Otherwise, what's the use of accepting a spiritual master? Srila Prabhupada said a spiritual master is not a stepping stone. You don't step on his head and go over. Yes.
I guess I'm addressing this to Shanta Vigraha. We're all interested in this question. That I think in one sense you were kind of giving a hint of the answer to your own question when you first started asking. Well, you said, my experience in studying Prabhupada's books is I find, the more I read, I find all kinds of gems where there is more esoteric or more, you could say, advanced or higher tapas inherent in the Bhaktivedanta purports. So within the Iskcon society, if the spiritual master and his disciples are all taking shelter in Srila Prabhupada's books, it doesn't mean we're committing ourselves to only a partial presentation of Vaishnava Siddhanta. Again, we can also look at other books. It's not, and there are Iskcon approved quite a library developing of other literature, you might say. And Prabhupada said, yes, you should study the books of the previous acharyas, which is at the very beginning of Bhagavatam and purport. But even if we're just talking about Prabhupada's books as our main shelter, which you should be, then I think you yourself gave the clue there that the study of Prabhupada's books doesn't mean it's only preaching on this body and it's only preaching against Darwinians and it's only, preaching against Mayavad. Well, that can get pretty deep also. But it's also, Prayojana is also, the ultimate goal is also there. I think you indicated that within the Bhaktivedanta purports as well. Whereas in other words, we would say we're limiting ourselves to Prabhupada's books, but actually it's not a limitation. I think you yourself are thinking. But then again, the relationship, the individual relationship, the point is well taken. That, for instance, if one is very, very intellectual and has intellectual needs, which may not be purely spiritual, you can say those are material needs, but still, if one has that propensity, I know one case in particular where a very learned devotee, his PhDs and that, he was just not satisfied that his guru didn't have the intellectual capacity to answer his questions. Intellectual in the sense referring to Shakti. So that can be a problem. So in that sense, there's also the personal choice of who my spiritual master will be.
Also, we should remember that Chaitanya Charitamrita is considered by all Vaishnava acharyas to be the crest jewel of Prayojana, of the ultimate goal of Krishna consciousness. I mean, it's considered to be just the summary. It takes things from Ujjvala Nilamani, from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, from Bhagavad Gita, from Srimad Bhagavatam. It's summarizing the essence of all these transcendental scripts, and Srila Prabhupada translated and commented extensively. So, not that Srila Prabhupada, anyone who thinks that Chaitanya Charitamrita is some limitation doesn't understand. You see that all Vaishnava acharyas, when they're speaking about Prayojana, their main source of quotations is Chaitanya Charitamrita. So anyway, I think because of the time, we'll stop here. All glory to Shri Guru, Shri Gauranga, Shri Prabhupada.
Jai.